we know the history where this country has come from, almost at the brink, earlier this it was at the brink of a civil war, if things didn't go the way they went, where we had the former president seeking an unconstitutional and extension of his term of office, and things worked out in favor of the current president because of the overwhelming support he received from the civil society and citizens in general, who voted in their numbers to get the new regime coming on board. And so, as a beacon of democracy in the Western African region, the country demonstrated the resilience that have not been seen for a very long time, and stood their ground in terms of resisting a constitutional extension of term of office of the former president. And the former president and his team had no choice but to concede and step out of the way, and allowed President Faye to step in and take the lead. And so it was a momentous moment and a very historical, expression of how African countries should explore their democratic spaces and ensure that they respect the voice of the people. I think that's one point I would like to really underscore in our conversation today, because what we are currently seeing in different African countries is the exact opposite, where ruling regimes constantly resist the will of the people. We've just seen what's going on, for example, in Mozambique next door, and does not sound good for democracy in Africa. So we need to celebrate these moments where we see pockets of excellence, where the rule of the voice of the people is appreciated. We've just seen how peaceful power has transitioned in Botswana, and now we've seen just also in Senegal after this parliamentary election, how people have expressed their intention to support the current presidency, and we've seen overwhelming number of MPs elected under his card. And so we assume that there is now going to be momentous in terms of him translating the electoral campaign promises now into actual programs.
I think the question becomes, Doctor, on that matter, in terms of moving ahead, looking at their past, because in this instance, we've seen, of course, a ad hoc coalition of the Alliance for the Republic as well as the Senegalese Democratic Party that have worked against the present administration. Is this perhaps, with this victory in the parliamentary elections, does this signal an end of that era and heading on into a perhaps brighter future?
I would like to on the side of a brighter future, because change has happened through a ballot. And that is very important, because that underscores one of the principles of democracy or a democratic state. And I think the coalition politics in this case will just follow suit to know that the real ultimate power resides with citizens and not with political parties. And so if political parties are not going to work out a way of ensuring that citizens' voices do matter in their leadership, then they'll be squandering the sovereignty that they have been given and trusted by citizens, because when citizens vote, they are actually surrendering their sovereignty to say, we are going to trust party X or leader X to take our aspirations forward. But when that is squandered, either by a political leader or by a political party, citizens have a way of reclaiming it back through the ballot. And this is what we like to see happening across the continent. So my view is that it signals a new day and a new dawn for the Senegalese community, and more importantly, in their politics, because they're going out to see how a real democracy functions, even when there is differing opinions and there is differing persuasions on which trajectories to be taken care of. I think the real test now, henceforth, now that the PASTEF has won and has now significant support in the National Assembly, I think the largest test for them now will be to deliver on there's going to be a real test on how they're going to translate now the government programs into reality, so that they can meet the needs of society and give them a chance to change their lives.
I think on that end as well, the recent discovery of larger debt in the national fiscus than what was reported, the underreporting of that debt, seems to have hindered Senegal in some sense with the IMF and the postponement of their $1.9 billion loan. I think in that sense it's going to be interesting to see how they navigate this field to ensure that they don't have an issue as we've seen in other African states when it comes to IMF loans, and in especially this sense because it seems as if though the Senegalese government has lost some sense of credibility when it comes to the matter of finance in the international market.
Yes, and again that's a very serious situation here because if the current presidency do not balance that act properly, their relationship with the IMF versus the requirements that the IMF may place in their hands so that they can achieve or acquire those loans will be very tricky, because we know that from the history that the IMF and other Bretton Woods institutions, whatever sometimes they demand is usually out of control of sitting administrations, because those needs sometimes go against the will of the people. We saw what, for example, happened maybe this year in Kenya, for example, where the demands that the IMF had placed on the country's leadership in response to their request to get some money almost drove the country to the brink of a civil war. Unfortunately and sadly, there were many lives that were lost because of the protests that followed. I don't think President Faye and his team would want to go that route. So they will try to negotiate, in my view, the terms of those kind of loans in a way that does not put him in direct opposition with the citizenry that has supported his political candidacy. Doing that, if it doesn't get to do the best way that way, it will put him in a very difficult position, because we have a very hungry opposition that is waiting for any opportunity to occur for them to be able to say, you see, we told you about this government, they will not look after your interests, they're not going to support you and all that thing. So I think you will approach this with a lot of sensitivity to ensure that whatever he will agree to, even with the IMF, is not going to put him into direct coalition with the citizenry and with the rest of political parties in the country.
Doctor, when we look at this issue and we zoom out just a bit and look at the entirety of Africa and the elections that have happened this year, we've seen, as you've mentioned earlier in the program, the issue of Botswana, or rather the lack of issues in Botswana, the present circumstances in Mozambique and the response of SADC on that issue. We've seen as well issues in Kenya and many other nations, but at the same time we've seen these little semblances of democracy working, and as you pointed out as well, Senegal has now been in some sense viewed as a bastion in that right, and many articles that I've read, they view them as a success when it comes to democracy due to how this year worked out and this election process worked out for them. Does this then entail that in some sense democracy in Africa seems to be blossoming and a more, let's say, democratic conscious African populace is propagating throughout the continent?
Yeah, well, I think to a great extent, I would like to suggest that we are starting to see some pockets of excellence where we see a true appreciation of what a democratic process should look like, especially in electoral matters, because we know that elections are very competitive business, as it were. But what we've not been able to see is three things. Smooth transition of power, and where presidencies are changing from one to the next. We've been longing for that kind of a thing in our continent, and Botswana has done that so well to show that there is possibility to do that. And of course, even so the other day, Mauritius did the same, where the incumbent agreed that conceded that he has lost the elections and allowed the winner to take it all and to continue forward. What also we are seeing, secondly, on our continent is that citizens are becoming more active and more vocal about who they want them to lead them, which is very important because democracy hinges on the people. As I said earlier, the true owner of power, political power, is citizenry. And so when citizens start standing up to saying no to things that threaten their democracy, for example, that unconstitutional extension of presidential terms, unconstitutional reforms that are being propagated by sitting administrations to want to change sections of the constitution so that it can support a particular political ideology, that it goes against the principles of democracy. Where we see also, for example, in some African countries, the use of internet shutdown so that they can limit, public engagement over social media and things like that. When citizens start talking publicly against such things, then we know there's a glimmer of hope for our continent, because there's only one way to make democracy thrive in our continent, and that is to give citizens the opportunity to engage in a process that they think and believe it's worth their fight. And unfortunately, our continent has not been doing so well in this regard by allowing, multiple views and opinions to come through and be comfortable with differing opinions. We can differ about what we think, but we have one common vision, and that is to lead our nation to a place of prosperity. So I think what we are seeing now is that citizens are becoming more stronger, more involved, and more vocal to determine the trajectory of their countries, even when it costs them the ultimate price, dying for it. And the third part, I think what we're seeing with what is emerging now is that political coalitions might be the way to go, as we see many where there is an entrance of new political leadership into the political landscape of many countries on the continent. And I think the coalescing has started to shape the way politics are done in different countries. Of course, this is not without some challenges, but I think it's also already saying that it cannot be business as usual, as it were. And then we're seeing, for example, the loss of control by liberation parties across the continent. They're losing their grip, so to speak, on political trajectory of the countries. As new coalitions come on board, citizens are directly saying enough is enough. We want change, and we want the change through the ballot and not through the bullet.
Doctor, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. I want to thank you for coming onto our airwaves, of course, for African Mirror, and I hope you have a fantastic day further. Thank
you so much for having me on the show.
Never a problem. That was Dr. Paul Kariuki, Executive Director of Democracy Development Program at the University of KZN. You can also catch him on Spotify, by the way. They have our episodes there as well, and much more.